Good morning, how we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to answer a question sent in by Andy, and Andy asked the following. Hi, I have a question about controlling the pot. I'm new to poker, I've only been playing for about 2 months, and I've been reading tips for beginners on the internet to help improve my game. One tip was to maintain control of the pot, as this will make it easier to win as I will have the betting lead. I'm having trouble understanding how the betting lead helps you win. I understand that pot control means you decide how much goes in, but won't you still lose to someone who has the nuts? So Andy, thank you so much for sending this question in, and there's a few things that kind of come to mind here. First and foremost is, why is the betting lead beneficial in the first place? So within any poker hand, be it pre-flop or post-flop, there's always one person who is the aggressor, who has the betting lead, who is the one driving action right this moment. And this can switch from street to street, right? Someone could be the aggressor, they c-bet, their opponent check raises, the c-better calls, and now all of a sudden the roles are reversed, right? The person who check raises is now the aggressor who has the betting lead going into the turn, and the other person has switched from the aggressor to the passive player. Just is what it is, it happens. But the thing about the betting lead or being the aggressor in a hand is that you decide typically how much money goes in, if any money goes in on the street, especially when you're the one closing action. So if you're in position, your opponent checks to you, you have the betting lead right that moment, you could decide to apply pressure, and you decide how much pressure you want to apply in terms of bet size, or you could check and go on to the next street. You control that option, and your opponent is typically playing off their heels and has to respond to your aggression or threat of aggression compared to the other way around. So oftentimes if we have a big edge, we want to be the ones that are driving action rather than being the ones that are constantly facing it and having to decide what we want to do. If we're the ones that are controlling it, deciding where and when we want to take free cards, deciding where and when we want to apply pressure, especially with edge differential in our favor, that can be extremely profitable. This is really why you want to start by putting yourself in the aggressive driver's seat rather than constantly being the passive person who constantly getting pressure faced at you and having to decide for there what you want to do. That's a much trickier proposition than being the one who's driving the action yourself. Now, the second thing that jumps off your question is pot control, and pot control is a related concept to the betting lead, but it's a bigger concept that's honestly oftentimes very misapplied and misunderstood. A lot of players are going to cite pot control to justify nitty play. These are the same players that will only build big pots when they have monster or nuttish hands, but they're never going to build a medium to big pot when they have a single pair or they have a bluff. So they make it very obvious, and they pot control unless they have the nuts, in which case they try to pot expand very quickly, and these people are obviously very easy to read. Simply put, when the only justification for taking a pot control line is they might have a stronger hand, especially when the density of that strength is minimal compared to the entire range, chances are that person isn't fully understanding pot control. And for what it's worth, I've been there and I've had to do the work to get away from this kind of thought process. It's not uncommon to find videos that I did back in like 2012 or 2013, 2014, where there was way too much pot control, especially for today's standards. And just simply put, it was a little bit too nitty, it was a little bit too focused on, okay, the player pool is playing this way or that way, but as the game continues to mature, overly using pot control as a justification and overly using pot control lines can really damage your win rate at the end of the day. And then the third thing that jumps off your question, Andy, is yes, sometimes they are going to have the nuts and you are going to end up paying them off. And that's true whether you bluff into them and they just happen to wake up at the top of their range, or if you value town yourself into their nuts. It happens. However, in a couple of pro videos over on Red Chip Poker, Doug Hull had a chance to sit behind an unstudied player, which is kind of the nice way of saying fish, and get them to talk out their reasoning for each play they made. And one of the biggest takeaways was that unstudied players focus heavily on winning and losing hands. That's their main focus. Am I winning a lot of hands? Am I losing a lot of hands? Contrast that to good players who are focused on maximizing their wins, minimizing their losses, and making sure they're making the best decisions at all possible points. Case in point, imagine for a moment that you have top pair and deduce that your opponent can have the nuts. For a moment, pause right here and decide if you would apply pot control or value bet. Now, in all actuality, this is a very incomplete example. If villain has one nut combo and 99 second best combos that they would love to give your bet action action with, then clearly pot control is suboptimal. You should definitely be value betting here. But if villain has 1 nut combo and 0 second best combos that would give your bet action, then clearly betting is setting money on fire here and pot control would be far better. So don't fall into the trap of only focusing on hands that beat you. If you do this, you're going to over-apply pot control and you're going to end up missing tons of value with your non-nut hands simply because most of your range is going to be non-nut hands in the first place. And if you're doing this constantly, then you're going to miss tons of value bets when your opponents have second best hands that they would gladly give your bet action with. So you have to think about their entire range, the density of the hands that beat you compared to the rest of the hands, and make decisions from there. And to be honest, this is a trap that most tight regs end up falling for. They overly focus on their opponent could have a hand that beats them, they're really not great at hand reading in the first place, so they just kind of live in the fear part of things and then end up pot controlling way too aggressively, miss tons of value bets, and their win rate just tanks because of it. Sure, they don't lose a lot of big pots, but they lose so many small to medium ones that their win rate really just can't recover. But the good news is that you can avoid this pitfall if you focus on making plus EV decisions and not making decisions solely out of fear that you could lose a hand. This is not the way we want to think about poker. We're going to lose hands. It's baked into the equation. In fact, say it with me. I'm not going to win every single hand. I am going to lose some hands. This is honestly something that most people, for whatever reason, don't understand. You're going to lose a lot of pots. Some that you played really well and some that you played really poorly. You're gonna lose a lot of pots. You're gonna win a lot of pots too, but if you're not focused on maximizing those winning pots and you're just constantly losing way too many of those small to medium pots, it's really going to crush you at the end of the day. Focus on making plus EV decisions, not decisions solely out of fear because you could end up losing the pot. You're gonna lose the pot sometimes, whether or not you make the right or wrong decision, so focus on the plus EV stuff, not just could I lose here. If you're interested in seeing an example of this, I would highly suggest checking out a series I did where I hand read a player throughout an entire hand street by street and go for max value even when my opponent has some stronger hands in their range. Just visit splitsuit.com/build or I'll leave a link in the description box and take your time with this if you're newer to hand reading and thinking in ranges. This skill set is crucial and any improvements will have a massively positive effect on your game as a whole. Again, you can view that entire thing at splitsuit.com/build. So Andy, hopefully that all answers your question and gets you pointed in the right direction when it comes to some of these bigger picture concepts. Remember that a lot of advice on the internet directed towards new or beginner players is kind of on the tighter side, a little bit on the nittier side, and while that's safe and it gets you started on the right foot, it's not necessarily the end-all be-all place that you want to be strategically. So really understand these concepts and understand when they just simply don't apply and when they miss too much value. Again, be focused on plus EV decisions, not just could I lose this pot. So hopefully that helps. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. And if you have your own hand or question that you want to send in, you can always do so at splitsuit.com/ask and fire it right in there. As always, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.